Well, good morning, everyone. We'll take two now, and lots to talk about. So let me actually get at it right away. I know, like all of us, we are watching the evolving situation in the Middle East, and while it has been clearly American policy for decades now that Iran should not have a nuclear weapon, and that Israel has the right to defend itself, we are unfortunately now entering into very uncharted territory. The one thing we know about the Middle East is it's a lot easier to start a war there than it is to end one. My top concern is the safety and security of the nearly 40,000 Americans, military personnel, diplomatic personnel that are in the region. We must keep them safe. And what so concerns me is that I have no idea what this administration's policy is on this conflict. I've asked repeatedly, has the intelligence changed about whether Iran had actually decided to move towards a nuclear weapon? The Director of National Intelligence, Gabbard, had said they weren't moving in that direction months ago. I got further confirmation on that this week. And yet we've got from the president a complete dismissal of that intelligence. And matter of fact, if I, as the vice chairman of the Intelligence Committee, a senior member of the United States Senate, has no idea what this president's current policy on this conflict is, what does that signal does that send to our friends, our foes around the world? I mean, the president at the beginning of this conflict said, well, America will help Israel defend itself, but is not going to get involved. That seems to have somewhat changed in the last 24 to 48 hours, whereas it seems now that the president is actually trying to provoke additional action with at least some of these tweets. This is an extraordinarily dangerous situation here. And I am gravely concerned that this zigzag approach is undermining confidence from our allies. It's undermining those nations in the Middle East, in addition to Israel, who are concerned about Iran in terms of the predictability of America's actions. And as I've said, if I don't know what's going on, with all the access I have, what are the American people thinking? What are our again, friends and foes around the world thinking? I think it is incumbent upon the president or his foreign policy team to brief the Congress before they put American troops in harm's way in this conflict. And I hope we'll have more to hear. I know the Secretary of Defense is coming up to the Hill. I'm going to be meeting with the Director of National Intelligence later. But this is a extraordinarily challenging time. And once again, out of this administration, we get chaos instead of any kind of plan. Another issue that we are dealing with is this awful big bill. I think it is one of the most cruel bills I've ever seen in my time in politics as governor or senator. And increasingly, as Americans learn more about this, what Trump calls big beautiful bill, the more they dislike it. Let's go through some of the high points. We now have a newer estimate from the referee, the CBO, that says this bill will add about over $3 trillion to the debt. We've already got an unsustainable debt. This does not cut the debt. It adds over $3 trillion. That's by also factoring in the additional interest costs. It provides a massive tax break for the wealthiest Americans, while those Americans, those Virginians who are making roughly minimum wage, will see their overall costs go up about 53%. That's a reverse Robin Hood. In healthcare, this bill would basically take over 16 million Americans off of health insurance, and it would take us back to where we were before Obamacare. And Obamacare had some good, had some bad, but it dramatically increased coverage. We've got the lowest percentage of Virginians without any health insurance ever at this moment in time. If this bill goes through, we will go back to where we were roughly in the mid-2000s. And Emergency rooms will be overwhelmed. Hundreds of thousands of Virginians will lose their health insurance from Medicaid, but hundreds of thousands of Virginians will also lose their health insurance because if they buy into what's called the marketplace, they will see their costs go up $800, $900 a month, and that will just be unsustainable. And if you're saying, well, gosh, I don't get my health insurance in those ways, so this shouldn't really affect me. No. Disrupting the marketplace of people purchasing subsidized insurance will end up driving up costs for everyone on health insurance. It will be a disaster, and the places that will get hardest hit will be rural communities. It will be cutting back on OBGYN services and hospitals and services across Virginia. It will dramatically cut back on mental health facilities. This is bad for the health care of Virginians. On top of that, this bill will also cut back on all of the clean energy credits, costing Virginia about 21,000 jobs, disproportionately cutting back on projects around wind and solar. It will also dramatically cut back on food assistance. Roughly 200,000 Virginians will lose food assistance. Do we really want our kids going to school without a school breakfast or school lunch? Does it really make any sense to actually go back and literally cut food banks? It's downright cruel. And one of the things, I guess as a kind of a budget nerd, that hasn't gotten any attention, food assistance through the program called SNAP is something that is generally done with federal and state partnership. One of the things that's buried in this bill is it moves the administrative costs, which are currently shared by the state and the feds, almost entirely upon the state's backs. So what does that mean? Well, it means if this bill passes, before we talk about the number of Virginians who are not going to get food assistance that have it now, it will add $300 million a year to the budget costs on an annual basis to Virginia. Do we really need to have that extra hidden cost? Is this basically a scam to transfer costs away from the feds to the states? I think any responsible state officials need to weigh in on this bill because it will be devastating, not just in Virginia, but across the country. And again, this is a bill that needs more sunlight because it stinks, and as Americans hear about how badly it stinks, they are coming out in overwhelming numbers. The last indication I saw said it's 2-1 against, and that's still with about a third of the Americans not really understanding its full ramifications. While they're trying to rush it through before July 4th, beyond meeting the ego needs of this president, is because this ugly, cruel bill, the more Virginians and Americans hear about it, the more they're going to hate it and dislike it and demand that we stop it. Final item has been my increasing concern about both the politicization of our military and the politicization of our intelligence product. One of the reasons why America has been so strong is not only because of the equipment that our military has, but the fact that allies around the world has known that the American military is non-political. As a matter of fact, as you take an oath to the Constitution, not to a president or a political party. And in the last 2 weeks, we've seen this president, I believe, dramatically politicize the military, sending Marines against the wishes of the governor into California when there's been no indication that they would be needed. The president literally doing a political speech at Fort Bragg and trying to get military members to cheer him on. And then this past weekend, where in celebration of his birthday, we had a military parade. Thank God the Army who ran the parade didn't fully buy in to the Trump self-obsession. But this is very dangerous. And again, to our allies around the world, if America's military is suddenly politicized, that doesn't make us safer. And then on the intelligence front, which I'm extraordinarily active in, we are seeing intelligence professionals fired if they don't bend the knee and put out intelligence product that is what the administration wants. That has never been the case. The value of our intelligence community is to speak truth to power. Remember when intelligence got cooked in the past? That led us into the war in Iraq. And if we've got the cooking of intelligence right now going on without a intelligence professionals being in charge, and frankly political flunkies in many cases demanding obedience to this president, that's the way you could lead and see this conflict between Iran and Israel blowing up and involving America in a not just potentially regional conflict, but greater, if intelligence professionals aren't allowed to do their job. Speak truth to power, tell the truth, don't cook the books. And we've seen this administration, from mishandling of information around the Signal Gate to firing of intelligence professionals because people like Director Gabbard doesn't like the results. And my concern now that intelligence could be being manipulated around this conflict in the Middle East. So far, at least, the intelligence community has stood by its conclusion that Iran was not moving towards a nuclear weapon. They were enriching additional uranium, but they were not weaponizing that yet, and that was left with the supreme leader. If there has been a change in that intelligence, I need to know, and I want to make sure that if it is changed, it's based upon fact and not political influence. So extraordinarily challenging time, both on the domestic front, on the international front, and it's time when we need people of goodwill in both political parties to stand up. We are potentially dealing with some of the most dramatic cuts in health care and dislocation of food assistance and clean energy advances at the same time that we have a chaotic foreign policy that could very well lead America into another endless war in the Middle East. So a lot on our plate, and I know I've gone a little bit over. I'll turn it over to Laura for your questions.
Senator, our first question is Mitchell Miller with WTOP.
Hi, Senator. Thanks a lot, as always, for joining us. I wanted to follow up in connection with the DNI, Tulsi Gabbard. As you alluded to, or as you mentioned, she has been skeptical that Iran is developing nuclear weapons, and it's looking more and more like she and the president are not on the same page. What do you make of this, and could it complicate matters? It sounds like you do think it could complicate matters and is complicating matters as the U.S. considers getting militarily involved in the Israel-Iran conflict.
Well, if the President of the United States is going to totally disregard the objective conclusions of our intelligence community, he needs to explain to the American people why he is overriding the intelligence community's assessment. He also has to explain why, from last Thursday when he said Israel could attack, but they're on their own, to what is happening today, what has changed. He needs to explain to Congress, if he decides to put American aircraft bombing Iran, what is the reasoning behind that? And he also owes to our allies and adversaries around the world a clear foreign policy. I don't have the foggiest idea what this president's foreign policy is as regards to Iran in the Middle East at this point. I think that's dangerous. I think it goes counter to the lessons we should have learned after Iraq and Afghanistan. I think it insults, frankly, the good work of our intelligence community, who are supposed to remain objective. And I fear that it will further isolate America from our partners around the world. We are in very dangerous territory. And if the president, as the commander-in-chief, wants to make these changes in policy, he owes all of us an explanation. We've gotten nothing but erratic tweets that seem to change by the hour. That is not the way to conduct American foreign policy during a regional and potentially global crisis.
Senator, our next question is Coulter Anstead with WTKR.
Hey, Senator, thanks as always for taking the time to talk with us. You mentioned briefly there about the Air Force and, possibly bombing Iran, but we've got two Norfolk-based ships, destroyers over there in the Middle East right now, the USS Forrest Sherman and the USS Truxtun. So I'm curious, what would you like to see the Navy's response be, if anything, to this current fighting? And then what would be your message to family members who have sailors on the trucks and the Forrest Sherman?
Well, I think it's appropriate that America deploys our naval resources into the region. That is important to make sure that if Iran does strike American bases or troops, we have ability to respond. I know some of our naval vessels have already been engaged in actually helping Israel defend itself, shooting down some of the missiles. But I think those sailors and their friends and families in Hampton Roads are owed by this president a clear explanation of what American policy is on this conflict. Not a tweet, not a erratic comment zigging and zagging. If we're going to put American sailors in harm's way, those sailors and their family and friends are owed a rational explanation by the president, addressing the American people, telling us in Congress what has changed in terms of the intelligence, and giving assurance of, as we've seen, as Colin Powell said years and years ago, if you break it in the Middle East, it's hard to fix it after the fact. And we have seen endless foreign wars in that region, and I think Americans frankly thought Donald Trump was not going to put us in another one of those endless foreign wars. And if there is intelligence or reasons that Americans don't know, or me as Vice Chairman of the Intelligence Committee doesn't know, that would make us change our policy, this president owes an explanation to those families, to the American people, and to Congress before he just arbitrarily puts American forces in harm's way.
Senator, our next question is Caitlin Harlow with WRIC.
Hi there, Senator. Thanks for taking the time. I wanted to ask about the Big Beautiful Bill. According to the Virginia Poverty Law Center, 37.9% of children in Virginia's small towns and rural areas rely on Medicaid. So what is your reaction to those Virginia families that would be affected by Medicaid restrictions in the Big Beautiful Bill?
Well, there's nothing beautiful about this big bill. It's ugly, it's cruel, and it's destructive. For the close to 40% of Virginia's kids who rely on Medicaid for their health care coverage, you're going to see literally over 300,000 of those kids and their families lose any health insurance. And when that kid still gets sick, where do they turn to? They got to go to the emergency room then. And parents will, we've seen historically, if you don't have health care coverage, you wait longer to take your kid to the doctor. And putting this burden on emergency rooms is going to drive up costs. It's going to, frankly, disrupt particularly rural hospitals in a way that some will have to close down. I've had so many of the rural hospitals say, you get these cuts and we won't be able to deliver children because we have to shut down our OBGYN services. Does it really make sense they're going to have to drive 4 or 5 hours to be able to get the health care coverage to deliver a baby? Aren't we more civilized? In 2025, shouldn't we expect more as Virginians and Americans than that kind of cruelty? And again, let me remind you, this is not just taking away those kids' health care. For many of them, it will take away their food assistance. What does it mean to take away and send a kid to school hungry? Because so many families are struggling. We've seen prices go up from a president promised that prices were going to go down. Prices have gone up, and they're going to go up even more as we've seen this wacky tariff policy really start to bite. And then one of the things that's the most cruel, with a bill that is going to add over $3 trillion to the debt, you're really going to go out and cut food banks with all these other cuts in place? That ultimate final stop. In many communities across Virginia, we've seen up to 1/3 of our population have to rely on the food banks. There won't be food in those food banks with some of the cutbacks that are being proposed, and already some that are partially in place. This is nothing beautiful about this bill. There is a hell of a lot that's cruel in this bill, and it's got to be stopped.
Senator, our next question is Hannah Brandt with Nexstar.
Thanks for taking our questions. I hear you saying that you and the rest of Congress are not getting enough intelligence about this administration's policy on Iran. But I'm wondering, once that does happen, what you think Congress's role should be in deciding how involved to get.
Well, Hannah, I'm spending a lot of time fully coming to understand what my great friend and colleague Tim Kaine's doing. That's why we have a War Powers Act, and I want to make sure that Tim has drafted that appropriately, and I think it'll be up next week. And I continue to talk with him. The reason there's a War Powers Act is to make sure that presidents don't go off arbitrarily. Why the Constitution says if you're going to go to war, you make a declaration of war, and Congress has to approve. And the idea that this president is, where his policy has been so chaotic, and we're not in one day, then we're threatening, and if they're not unconditional surrender, we're going to be in. And if there's been no change in the intelligence that Iran is not actually moving towards a nuclear weapon, he owes all of us, not a tweet, but to go before the American public and go before Congress and explain what our policy is. If I don't know what it is, what do everyday Virginians have to think at this point? And Congress does have a right to be told and intervene, and one tool could be Tim Kaine's War Powers Act that will be up for a vote, I believe, next week. The challenge is, though, that the damage could be done any moment now, and without an explanation, my fear is, because we're not even sure that using the bunker buster bombs that can only be delivered by American aircraft, whether even that alone could take out the nuclear facilities that Iran has been, at least around in uranium enrichment, has been trying to build. I've heard reports that it would actually take troops on the ground. Do we really think troops on the ground, Israeli or otherwise, is going to not lead to another never-ending war in the Middle East? The president owes us an explanation if that's the direction he's headed.
Senator, our next question is Gennaro Busey with 13 News Now.
Good morning, Senator. How are you today? Okay. We also came through a primary night last night in Virginia, which set up the Jay Jones versus Jason Miyares race. And obviously, attorneys general across the country have played a huge role in fighting against the Trump administration. What do you kind of see coming out of this attorney general race in Virginia in the wake of all the crazy policies that we're seeing coming out of Washington?
Well, I congratulate my friend Jay Jones. I think he's going to be a great attorney general. We need an attorney general in Virginia that actually works for the people of Virginia. And when you've got an administration that's as erratic as this administration is, as you've got an administration that constantly overrides, as we saw in California, the wishes of the state government and the government. I actually thought for a long time Republicans were supposed to be about states' rights. We're seeing the opposite in this case. I want an attorney general that's going to protect environmental laws, protect consumer protection laws, that's not going to just be a yes person for these Trump policies. And Jay Jones, somebody who's been a legislator, I think a very successful lawyer, somebody I've known Jay and his family for years. I think he's going to be a great attorney general that will actually stand up for the people of Virginia.
Senator, our final question is Angela Jones with the Hampton Roads Messenger.
Good morning, Senator. Thank you for taking my question. I was wondering if during your recent stop in Winchester and Charlottesville, did you hear that with the average American being squeezed financially and with high prices in many areas, including at the grocery store, many Americans across the country, including seniors, are not able to pay their real estate taxes and are losing their homes because of what is said to be inflated tax assessments. Is this on Congress's radar, and is there anything Congress can do to mitigate the situation?
Well, one thing's in terms of costs, one of the things we could do is actually have a rational tariff policy. You want to have an organized effort to go after where China is stealing intellectual property or indirectly subsidizing markets, count me in. But no, this president has basically decided to tariff everyone around the world, friend and foe alike. Say at one point they're going to be really high, then they're going to be low. He zigs and zags virtually every day based upon personal whims. And prices have already gone up. They're going to see them go up even more next month as the tariffs fully kick in, even at the lowest 10% level that he says will be the minimum. That's higher than tariffs were during the 1930s with the Smoot-Hawley tariffs that led to a depression. So I think prices are going to continue to go up, and we've got to try to force him back to a rational tariff policy. That is supposed to be Congress's responsibility. In terms of home insurance costs, though, this is a problem not just in Virginia, it's around the country, because we have not dealt appropriately with sea level rise, say in Hampton Roads, or the threat of storms that we saw with Hurricane Helene that so devastated Southwest Virginia. And my fear is, because you've also got this administration trying to roll back our transition to clean energy, these weather events are going to simply increase. And that will lead to higher home insurance costs. Truth is, the marketplace in this area, if the cost of refurbishing homes keeps going up because you've got weather events, I think there is a way we can work on things like flood insurance and others. But at the end of the day, part of this increase in home insurance rates goes to the fact that the marketplace and the companies are seeing the fact that Trump is moving away from trying to deal with sea level rise, climate change, and all the ensuing weather incidents. That doesn't make sense in the short term, and it sure as heck doesn't make sense in the long term. It will make many communities, it will price folks, particularly seniors, out of their homes, and that is not right. I'd be willing to look at other federal assistance, but you can't just do federal assistance if you don't go at the root problem, and the root problem is climate change and sea level rise, and we've got to address that and not simply ignore it, which this administration is trying to do.
Senator, that was our final question.
Thanks, everybody. Stay safe.